Hello and welcome to another episode of Laptop Retrospective, and today we have something that is unique for two reasons. One, as you can tell, it's still in the box. And the second is that you don't see too many of these out in the wild. Wyse is a computer company that has been around since pretty much the very beginning, and they have a pretty long history of pretty much making whatever you needed at the time. Toward the end of their independence, we'll say, they were mainly focusing on this virtual desktop infrastructure VDI thin client machine. And what that is essentially a bare bones desktop computer that has, standard interface. It had mouse, keyboard, monitor, a couple of USB ports, SD card readers, but it was running either an Atom processor, a Celeron processor, anything super duper lightweight, because the only thing that it was really doing was connecting to the internet or connecting to a server farm that actually had the real hardware on it. The benefits of this is that it gives you remote access, so you don't have to be on site where the computers are. It was essentially a cost-saving measure because rather than having the intense hardware deployed in multiple areas, you only had to spend money on it once, and then you'd have cheaper clients that would access it throughout, which makes sense if you think about it. It means that it's easier to secure because you just restrict access of one of these devices, or no longer accept its handshake from a network point of view, and you can no longer access the data. And of course, centralized management means that you're probably running VMs or virtual machines for the uninitiated on a server, and that means that they can be updated via console, and you don't need to worry about several machines receiving software updates across a network. This is one of those machines. And it is worth pointing out that they were bought by Dell in April of 2012. The Wyse line is still very much something that you can go out and buy, but it is now a subsidiary of Dell, and that's pretty much their shtick now, is that they have been relegated to the thin client mines. And they apparently do a good job. So without further ado, let's go ahead and open up this box and see what we get inside. Now, the person that gave this to me, I have no idea where they got it from. I think it was an online auction, but it's pretty cool to see more or less everything still intact. So we do have a power supply sitting over here that is not branded any particular way. We do have the battery, and we'll talk about this out of order here. So this is a 56.94 watt-hour battery, or about 5,200 milliamps, and this is 6 cells. So you're actually going to be able to do a fair amount of remote work if you have something to connect this machine to, and we'll get to that in just a minute, because that's really what makes this thing useful. You're not buying this as really a standalone unit. We do have a nice carrying case, which is still sealed in the plastic, and then we also have our quick start guide, which is located here. I should mention that this model has a variety of different nomenclatures, but it's generally referred to as the X-Class Mobile Thin Client. This one, I believe, is the X90C7 variant, and that simply just means what's configured in the actual unit itself. So it gives you some basic instructions, but beyond that, we are pretty much done with this box. So let me move it off to the side. And let's take our thin client out of its protective case, and we can install the battery on this thing. Now, let's talk about some specifications on this. Look at it, I don't even know if this was ever issued. What we have here is an 11.6-inch display, which is 1366 by 768. On the inside of this, we have an Intel Atom Z520, which is a 1.3 gigahertz CPU. Most of these have 1 gigabyte of RAM and a 2 gigabyte SSD. Some had 2 gigs of RAM, and we're talking PC2 6400, and then a 4 gigabyte SSD. Now, as you can imagine, with solid-state drives that small, you're not installing a full version of most distros of Linux, or Windows for that matter. What these are designed for, primarily this one, is to run ThinOS, which is specifically designed to connect to a specific operating system on the server to allow you to do your work. Windows 10 IoT Edition can also be installed in some instances on these, but that's pretty much all you're going to get. We do have a monumentally small trackpad, which is about the size of maybe 2 fingers. We have a left and right button. It's really a mono button with 2 switches underneath. It's not great, let's be real. We do have a webcam and microphone array up at the top included in the display. The keyboard is actually not the worst thing I've seen on a Dell or other subsidiary products. It actually has some good scallops. Typing is spongy, but it's not super claustrophobic. These buttons over here are definitely unique. I'm trying to think of another keyboard where I have seen both 2 currencies above the arrow keys. That is a very specific setup. I don't know of any other laptops that have that. That is probably unique to this. I've never seen it before. Carrying on with ports, on this side over here, we do have the Kensington lock slot, network, USB 2.0, headphone and microphone jacks separated. And on this one, we have our card reader. On the other side, we have our power plug, VGA, and an additional 2 USB 2.0. It is worth noting that along the bottom here, we have a series of indicator lights for a variety of statuses of the machine. Now, we'll do a very quick disassembly of these units because really there isn't a whole lot to talk about, I don't think. And realistically, these are not common machines to see in the wild because they're not really useful to anybody after their service life has ended. Unless you have a server that you're going to use a thin client for at home or at your business and you're getting this on surplus, there really isn't a whole lot of market or resale value to these, which is one of the reasons why you don't see them come up. They're not like a Latitude or a ThinkPad or an EliteBook where after they've been used, you do a little bit of upgrading and then you can give them a second life. So if we look on the inside of this so far, we can see a couple of slots that are unoccupied. We do have what appears to be an M-SATA slot. Given the era of this machine, I don't think that's M.2. And then it looks like we have another one over here. This would have been for the WWAN connection. The antennas are kind of a dead giveaway there. We do have our Wi-Fi card still present. And we do have what appears to be an actual bay for an actual hard drive. The post configuration here is certainly unique on what it would hold in there, but we do have the standard connector there. Theoretically, I suppose, there wouldn't be much stopping you from dropping in a regular SSD, I would strongly recommend, and using that for local storage or maybe installing an operating system. But again, with the configurations, especially with the maximum amount of RAM that this thing can handle, yeah, you're best off using it as a thin client as intended. The other cover that we've got here gives us access to, I believe, the only DIMM slot for memory. And if we flick that open and turn this module around, this is a 2 GB stick, and I believe that is essentially the maximum that this board can handle. If it wasn't 2, I think it was 4 tops. And again, you're not running a whole lot modern on that isn't thin client software. As you can imagine, there will not be much to boot without the thin client OS or anything for it to connect to. So in terms of things to showcase, we are definitely getting toward the end of the show, as it were. But I will put it back together, and if there is anything that is worth me adding at the end of the video, then you'll see it in the next cut. All right, our battery is quite flat, so I'm going to go ahead and plug the machine in and see if we can get some life out of it. It's looking for a bootable device, and of course it doesn't find one. But let's see if we can find something that'll play nice with it. So hard disk drive, others, floppy drive, CD, DVD. Yeah, it doesn't look like it supports booting into a USB, which kind of makes sense, I suppose, for the thin client machines. So there's separate options for hard disk drives and SSDs, which leads me to believe that you can probably have both of those kinds of things installed. So you might be able to occupy a few mSATA slots potentially, and then of course have the 2.5-inch bay with something in there as well. Total system memory 2 gigs. It's not exactly what I would want to put a spare drive into and necessarily use, unless I was intending to access a server remotely. It's a neat idea, but in terms of hardware, it's really no different than your standard netbook. So definitely cool to take a look at it. It feels pretty well built, but realistically, outside of some pretty niche applications, it's probably not going to be that useful to the average person. At any rate, ladies and gentlemen, I hope that you enjoyed this little video on a pretty uncommon little laptop. If we can really call it that, I should probably call it a thin client. If you enjoy this sort of content and would like to see more, I am going to encourage you to do the big four. Please like the video, share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so the next time I feature something odd and different on this channel, you'll be the first to know about it. Thank you so much, and I will see you next time.